All right, folks, so it should be share. There we go. Let's see. I'm going to set my alarm clock. Stopwatch. Start. So we're going to start on cumulative culture today. Hopefully we'll finish this whole lecture today, but in the event that we don't, guess what? We'll push the rest of it to Wednesday. All right, so cultural evolution versus cumulative culture. A cultural evolution, just like the description of standard evolution, is just a change in the relative representation of memes in the idiosphere through time, so that different strategies that are not genetically encoded, but are culturally inherited or acquired, will shift in frequencies as a result of within individual vetting, i.e. individuals trying on different strategies, or among individual competition when individuals bear different memes. Although cultural evolution can also occur without any adaptive elements to it, right? So sometimes memes shift in frequency just because of chance or because of random factors. That it's not that they produce greater pleasure. It's not that they produce superior performance results, but just they have fads that go in and out of favor from non-adaptive memes, right? And memes can also, I mean, if it's an earworm or something that if a meme is just infectious in its host and plays to certain sensory biases, then that still is an arguably an adaptive process. I'm not going to ask you guys to draw a line between the notion of is this an adaptive mimetic cultural evolution scenario or is this a drift cultural evolution scenario, but you should know that there are drift equivalents to the changes in meme frequencies present in animal populations, much akin to what would occur in something like conventional evolution with different allele frequencies. Cumulative culture is something even more highfalutin and arguably cool about cultural evolution, and that is that more complex memes that are superior to their predecessors in either in their infectiousness in the host's mind, playing to their certain kinds of biases and aptitudes, or because they produce greater performance, more and more complex memes can extend off of simpler memes and replace them through time so that new technologies, new devices, new strategies can grow in complexity using the predecessor memes as a starting place. Now that we have this basic technique, a more complicated technique can develop or evolve that replaces the old one if it's superior in some way. And then when that next more complex and more efficient, more productive, more infectious meme is there, the next generation of mimetic cultural evolution can use that intermediate complexity meme as a backdrop to make even more complex meme. And so you can get this cultural evolution that's cumulative, whereby subsequent memes are building off of precursor memes that were simpler to either meld different memes together or increase their complexity overall in ways that enhance the performance of the memes and their bearers usually. And the neat thing about this is that when this process goes on and on and on and on, we can get final products that are way more complex and way more effective than any one individual in the population could ever execute on its own. So like, you know, if we look at things like canoe design in Micronesia through time, you know, the first canoes that came about were pretty simple, like basically just logs that people sat on and then like paddled around. And then later on, you know, they hollow those things out and they become more stable and they understand the basic physics of like the breadth of the boat to the length of the boat and the enhanced stability that provides to the inhabitants, the occupants of the vessel versus the efficiency with which they glide through waves versus the efficiency with which they turn. And you suddenly saw these boat designs that became more and more complex. Sails were added, paddles changed, there were stabilizing components to the vessels. They would do scaffolding, basically buttresses to help stabilize the boats. You know, catamarans showed up, multi-sailed vessels, and over the course of a few hundred years, the complexity of these canoe designs and sailboat designs, basically, throughout Micronesia became so complex and so efficient that no one in that first population, that were basically sitting atop those logs and paddling around, could have possibly imagined in their wildest dreams what that final meme could look like, right? There was no individual gifted enough to be able to have leapt from the original meme to the meme that was devised later on. Impossible. And the original bearers of those simple memes produced the fodder, produced the antecedent that allowed this whole catalyzing thing to go off, to combo off. So this is very much one of the strongest features of humanity, one of the things that makes us impressively unique. So there are tales of this all over, pretty much anything you can imagine scientifically, socially, your smartphone, the computer you're looking at right now. Like, there is no one person that if we went back to cave painting that could create any of these things, right? They couldn't imagine the final result, and their brains couldn't contain all of the necessary advances to be able to create this chain of discoveries that would eventually produce a computer, a cell phone, a ship to the moon, electric vehicles, you name it, deep sea vessels, even like third wave antibiotics. Like, these are really impressive things that are the result of cumulative culture. A quiche. I didn't really like quiches, but whatever. I wanted to do something that wasn't so romantic. All right, so cumulative culture. No one individual could devise the end result. It has to happen by individuals basically expending all of their cerebral capacity, all of what they're capable of doing to make the next step or a few steps in this comboing chain. And then subsequent individuals inherit that meme, likely from a totally unrelated individual, at least originally, where the innovator is probably an unrelated individual, and then they jiggle it around and mess with it and try new variants of it. And every so often, if everyone's doing that, another individual, oftentimes a highly innovative individual, will produce an advancement, right? And then so on and so forth. So new individuals add to the ideas of old, often long dead individuals, but they inherit a blueprint of how to create the next unit in cumulative culture. Some of those memes that arise subsequently are superior to their predecessors, and when they are, that is evaluated within that host and evaluated across the population, sometimes in a very cognitive, explicit way, like they start investing in it and they buy it, and et cetera, et cetera. So in human culture, it's, information is spread instantaneously. There's basically an electrode into your brain that allows you to take every passing thought you have and publish it instantly online to dozens or hundreds of other individuals. Millions and millions of people could see your idea or fleeting impression in your brain almost instantaneously now. It's not how it started, but it's neat that now, more than ever, we have one panmictic population of possible transmission for new cultural innovations. An enormous effective population size. We might not be able to breed with each other so panmictically, so conventional evolution by natural selection or other means has a smaller effective population size, but communication, we have basically one giant panmictic pool now on planet Earth, unless you're one of these uncontacted tribes that are precious few now, and they don't really want to remain uncontacted. Many of those uncontacted tribes have modern conveniences that would surprise you. Okay, so this combo, this cumulative culture element is viewed to be, one of the things, one of the hallmarks of being human. All right, so how do you evaluate cumulative culture experimentally, right? So like, it's all well and good. We can see evidence of cumulative culture all around us. My TV over there, or good God, my dresser is probably as an outcome of cumulative culture, although it is still wrapped in saran wrap. Oh boy, I'm basically camping, and I'm going to be camping until next year. I will have been camping for about 2 years of my life when this is all said and done with the whole coronavirus thing. I will be excited to develop the next chapter of my life. Anyway, so enough about me. Let's talk about cumulative culture. All right, so the way you do cumulative culture experiments with humans is you give them a task that is unfamiliar to them, and you let them do this thing with some objective goal, right? And then you let them collaborate with a second individual on the task. And then possibly even a third individual. So now there's a group of 3 working on the task together. And then at the next time step, that first individual that was working on the problem on their own, they gotta go. And a new naive individual that has never worked in that task is now there with the second individual and the third individual that were there, and they work on this thing together. And then you take that second individual that entered, this young lady like right here hypothetically, and you remove her. And now you slowly have this turnover in group composition where there are experienced individuals that have played this game, exhibited this strategy at least thrice. Usually it's thrice because that's the simplest. And then, that means 3 times, by the way. And then the next person shows up, and then the next person shows up. So there are always new individuals, but they have a finite amount of experience they can have. They have an experimental life expectancy you've given them, and that's 3 rounds. And then you just do this over and over and over. The normal task that you get these individuals to do is something like creating a tower. Make the tallest tower you can, right? And you have a limited number of materials. So like, this is the amount of this like sticky putty you get. These are the number of straws or spaghetti sticks you get. Make the tallest tower you can. Use these materials efficiently and stably. And so you can see through time that the height of those towers gets greater and greater. And then at the end, that cumulative culture result is much superior to having one individual play this game over and over and over and over and over. Or even 3 individuals that when you get to the group size of 3, they play the game over and over and over. Not only is it a function of the transmission of information that allows this cumulative culture outcome to be greater and greater, but it's also that new individuals are showing up all the time that have different perspectives, will try new things, will jiggle things around and mess things up a little bit sometimes, but occasionally they'll do something great. They'll think of something that no one else in the group would have thought of with the original 3 individuals. And that allows the whole culture, that group of 3 that passes through time, to be superior to just the same 3 individuals that went all the way through, or any one individual, no matter what genius they were, from reaching that final result. That is what it is to be human. The fact that we're constantly getting new individuals, they have different perspectives, and they'll screw things up a little bit, but occasionally they come up with something wonderful, and even long after they're gone, their influence echoes through time. And you can see these things happen in cumulative culture under experimental settings in human beings. What do you know? We're not the only ones that have cumulative culture in experimental contexts. So no shocker, primates have been demonstrated to have cumulative culture dynamics in a very similar way that I just demonstrated to you in human populations, experimental populations, but there's a neat experiment with homing pigeons that I think will shock you a little bit. Homing pigeons. You drive a pigeon far away from its little roost or whatever the hell it is in your home. It has a special name. It's not a covey. Anyway, whatever, it's its original home. And you take these birds and you take them all the way away from their house, and then you let them go in a random spot they've never seen before, and then they have to find their way home. Homing pigeons are very good at finding their way home. Normally, they work in little groups where they're like, paying attention to each other and flicking their heads around and looking at each other and making collective decisions. They like to follow roads. So like, oftentimes the homing pigeon will find like a road or a tree line and then use that to orient itself over and over and over and figure out where it should go home. All right. Sometimes they're really good at this and they're fast at getting home. And sometimes they take a while before they show back up to the house. And the neat thing about experiments with homing pigeons is by the time you get back to your lab, the birds are there and the data's back. They figured it out. All right, so what did they do? They had a home, so this woman's name is, she's at Oxford University. I can't remember her name now. She's really pleasant. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so what they basically did, what she basically did with her lab, was she took this pigeon, and she took it off into some random place I've never seen before, and had it try to fly home. And they have 12 attempts to fly home over and over and over. And that shows you like, okay, through time, does this individual get much better? Then that individual shows up with, gets a new pigeon that's never been taken to that spot before. And now that pair of pigeons flies home. And then at the next step, she takes away the original pigeon. So now there's an experienced pigeon who had interacted with the orange pigeon at some point. In this case, it's this red pigeon. And they have 12 attempts to try to find their way home. And then you take away the then you take away the orange pigeon, you add the green pigeon. Then those two get 12 attempts to fly their way home. And then you take away the red pigeon, and you add a blue pigeon. And so there's this transmission of information that's occurring through these birds. And if you look at how swiftly through time they find their way home, you can see that the solo pigeons basically use the exact same route over and over and over, and they don't come up with any faster solution to get home. They figure out a way home, they do it over and over and over again. I am a solo pigeon. That is what I do. I do the same thing that mostly works for me every single day. I do not vary it. I do not let other people influence my strategies. This is not the way human beings are meant to be, and this is not the way pigeons are in real life. All right, so if you have an experimental group, yes, there are attempts early on to find their way home that are more circuitous. But through time, because new individuals are added to the group and they mess things up, they try different flight paths. And because these birds want to stay together, the knowledgeable, older, more experienced pigeon basically has to get dragged someplace it didn't really want to go. And sometimes, very often, this is a more circuitous path that is totally stupid, that they should not have gone on. But every so often, that new pigeon will screw it up in a way that allows those two pigeons, the experienced pigeon, to realize, oh my God, there's a better way to go home than I was using before. I don't have to fly east until I hit a tree line and then go north. There's a road just to the west, and I can follow that road straight up. And so through time, you can see that this circuitous route, this orange line here for the experimental group, gets shorter and shorter. And then by the 5th generation, good God, like it's a straight shot. Like they know exactly where they're going. They're not winding around anywhere. They know how to get back to Oxford, which is where these pigeons are going. These aren't especially clever pigeons. They just happen to be the prisoners of a research group at Oxford. So the important thing is that pairs of individuals that just continuously work together, they don't get that much better. Look at their winding routes. Those routes totally suck. If you look at the solo pigeons, I mean, they all basically descend on the same solution, each individual working in isolation, and it's an S shape, which means they're not getting home real straight. They're wandering around a lot, more than they need to. However, that experimental group, they go from a very circuitous sinusoidal wave to a straight shot, basically. The black line, which is the 5th generation of this experiment, straight shot home, not wandering around anywhere. Very impressive. These pigeons are recreating cumulative culture in a highly efficient way. And these are pigeons. These aren't winning any sort of like intelligence contest. They're not going to win the science fair. Not going to show up on Wheel of Fortune either. And yet they're able to recapitulate the kinds of dynamics that we think are uniquely human. Think of the other kinds of animals that are hypothetically probably capable of something like this. Maybe ants, maybe amoebae. We don't know. But I bet you that at least the raw materials to make something like this happen are probably not that complex and are probably present in lots of animals. And if this were advantageous, that means that in real life, it means that most animals could have the potential to evolve cumulative culture dynamics akin to the way human beings have. We just happen to have been benefited by a dynamic like this, and our brains evolved to excel at this, but lots of animals have the potential for this. They just haven't evolved it because probably for most animals, it's completely useless. like they just wouldn't help them under most circumstances. either as a consequence of their social structure or the kinds of environments they live in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or we got to it first as humans, and now we wouldn't allow another animal to undergo some sort of rapid evolutionary change as a consequence of cumulative culture. And so there's just so many brilliant animals that can exist on planet Earth's surface. I don't buy that last argument, but whatever. Hypothetically, it needs to be articulated. All right. It's all well and good, cumulative culture, right? We copy each other, we add more complexity to these memes, and these memes become endlessly complex, and isn't that great? We're so wonderful. Well, there's also a hypothesis among anthropologists that really, really complex memes can sometimes evolve that are through cumulative culture and cultural evolution, not necessarily genetically determined evolution, but can evolve from cultural evolution that reach such high levels of complexity that they end up costing a lot to the society. So if we have evolved as human beings to have our brains attracted to greater complexity in memes, to try them on and manipulate them around and add to them, and that's been something that's actually under genetic change through time, it's positively selected for in classic Mendelian sort of Darwinian sort of selection, that means that we can create a bias. We could have a bias for more complex memes, even when they're irrelevant or they're costly. So if we have a high aptitude for cumulative culture, this could theoretically cause us to create meaninglessly complex memes that actually have no benefit at all. Look at this wedding on the right-hand side here. Jesus God, there's like wisteria everywhere, and like roses dangling everywhere, and everything's dripping with flowers and gilded, and there's a white carpet and probably furs and things are going on here. Like there's so much waste. Like this wedding probably cost $200,000 or $500,000. Like all that fluted glass. Good God! Like this very happy bride here and a husband who looks somewhat less happy, but you can't really see him. His parents didn't pay for it, so it probably doesn't matter. Or usually that's the bride's parents that pay for it. I understand. Not a lot of my friends get married, so like I'm strictly theoretical in how I understand these things. But I would imagine that this wedding would be astronomically expensive. Now imagine that the analog of this young lady was tricked into wanting this, by the way. She was told since she was a child that this is what success was. And she probably had a preconceived bias that complex, costly, elaborate things, decadent things, Fabergé eggs are valuable. And they are, but why are they? Anyway, it's a lot of waste. Now imagine your society was overwhelmed with, I'm going to say a curse word. Please don't, by the way, I grew up lower income and in a rough area of rural Florida in an orange grove town with lots of gang problems. So I am incredibly foul-mouthed by nature. The fact that I've made it so far into this course without dropping a variety of, of curse words that Linda Blair wouldn't say is I consider it the zenith of my success in self-control. I have some impulse control problems as well. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, all of this needless shit. Imagine that your society was just dripping with this, the same way that this wedding is dripping with wisteria. All right, somebody's thought about what that could have, what kind of negative impact that could have on a society. Enter entanglement theory. Entanglement theory basically just says that societies could have developed so many meaninglessly complex rituals that cost them so much time and energy and attention that it could actually imperil them, right? So that if bad times come, if there's suddenly a limitation of resources, or there's another society nearby that's just not that preoccupied with complex Fabergé egg stuff, that this incredibly elaborate, highfalutin, like I only eat the cheeks of the dove that was shoved inside of this goose and cooked together, hummingbird hearts, that this superfluously complex society could succumb because it spends so much of its time on this wasteful crap, right? So you might think like Dionysian sorts of Bacchian, what is the Roman analog of Dionysian? Bacchian? Bacchus? Bacchian? I guess it's Bacchian. Anyway, come to my office hours and correct me if I've gotten that wrong. But I remember Dionysian, so we'll go with the Greek one. This sort of Dionysian element of like froth and frill and overly embellished cultural practices. You might think that that could be the way that Rome fell to what were more primitive, whatever that means. They were more efficient anyhow, brutal tribes from the north. Or maybe certain in the neotropics in South America, more complex, more highfalutin, more encumbered, entangled societies that have superfluously complex rituals were more likely to vanish. So entanglement theory basically just says that the superfluously complex preoccupation with highfalutin memes can eventually strangle a society. Whenever I think of entanglement theory, I imagine somebody wearing too many necklaces that are just too frilly, and like they can't figure them out. They basically end up choking themselves to death while trying to get one undone or something. Anyway, so it's a nice idea. It's also a very dark idea. People like to throw this around like, oh God, all of human society could be falling victim to entanglement theory. I view those people as like doomsday street-side Jesuses that have been preaching the end since the beginning and have always been wrong. But it's a theory, and if you put it into a model, things like this can happen. If you create worlds in silico and then run out simulations, you can see things like this happen. And basically it requires that at some point downstream, after a runaway dynamic, that there will be little or no vetting to increases in the complexity of memes. Like they're no longer being tried on for like success, but they're just being evaluated by their overall complexity. It's like, I mean, and the human history is overwrought with examples like this. Like, concepts of beauty and things have changed so much through time. Like, and oftentimes they're completely unlinked to things like what could be fertility indicators. Like, going back to, pre-Raphaelite art, it was considered really, really beautiful for models, usually women, to look really sickly and to have really sharp jaw lines, like a Dina Menzel style, like an anglerfish. And to look, so they would paint their canvases red before they would paint a model, and they would always have like a green tint to them. And they basically convinced all of their models to take, for aesthetic enhancement, arsenic to make themselves look sickly. Like, obviously, this is not an adaptive strategy or kind of aesthetic that could possibly be helpful under normal circumstances. But alas, there it is. Anyway, so little or no vetting of complexity, superfluous, rare, complex things can be adhered to the current mimetic idiosphere of a society, and that at least when this process started, this lack of vetting and just loving complexity for complexity's sake and memes, costliness for costliness' sake, that when that started, the society had a lot of resources. Because if they didn't, no one would want to waste money on superfluous or resources or calories or their functioning immune system, or even move for any sort of purpose other than survival, reproduction, etc. Right? So you have to have a font of resources that enable complexity to be just not that costly. Complex, weird, fluted glass doesn't cost you that much because you're just rolling in the dough. Right? Versus if you're not, like you're not gonna find things like that appealing, because you have more basic primal needs that need to be met first before you can have all this superfluous crap. Anyway, if you had a wedding like this on the right-hand side here, or if you're dreaming of one like this, just bear in mind that for the cost of this wedding, if you get married at 25 and you wait 21 years, so probably after your first divorce or possibly your second divorce, if you just save that $200,000, let's see, 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1.6 million. If you had just taken that $200,000 and you put it in an account, say thank you mom and dad, or aunts and uncles, et cetera, or in-laws, put all that money into a bank account, it's gonna be worth $1.6 million by the time you have your second divorce, and you could retire very comfortably, and would produce for you via dividends about $80,000 to $100,000 a year, and only be taxed as passive income. So like you'd be you'd be so rich. Don't do it. Don't get tricked. Anyway, that's my conservative side of me, rearing my ugly head. If you want to have this beautiful wedding, that is your prerogative, but don't do it. Jesus, please. The waste. Think of how many people you could help. Help yourself. Anyway, good gracious. The wisdom of collective decision making. I should break it off at this point. It's been 30 minutes, but I'll go through a little bit of this wisdom of the collective decision making thing. I was having too much fun in that last section and showing off my peacock feathers of like, look at all the things I know how to say. That I should have shut my mouth and just kept going. I apologize. I hope that you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Anyway, so collective behavior. Collective behavior sounds super fancy. All it means is like it's some behavioral outcome that you measured at the group level. And that could be a dyad, a pair of individuals. You measure something about them that is a collective output of that pair of individuals. It could be a group, it could be a society, it could be at the meta-societal level, planet Earth, whatever. And whatever you measure about them behaviorally, when they're in a group setting, is the collective outcome. That is the collective behavior. It might just be the simple average of what every individual did. Doesn't matter, it's collective behavior. It might be a non-additive outcome that involves it's the product of subtle interactions of individuals in the social group. That would also be called collective behavior. So both additive and synergistic properties can underlie collective behavior. And a collective behavior can either be measured from a pair of individuals to millions and millions, all of humans on planet Earth. 6 or 7 billion people could also be a collective behavioral outcome as long as it's a behavior. What do you know? So it could be mating rates in water strider groups, or house hunting decisions in collective ants, or the frequency of fighting agonistic encounters in flies. If you measure at the group level and you have a summative statistic for it, that's it. Additive versus synergistic collective behavior. I had just mentioned this before, but we're going to go over this now because it's worth mentioning. Again, because I'm going to have several slides on this, additive outcomes basically just means that the group's collective behavior is just the average of what every individual did in the group, and they did what they would have done if they were by themselves. Each individual just did what it would normally do, whether or not there were other individuals around it, and then you measured the group's output, which is just the sum of all of what individuals would do if they were by themselves. A synergistic outcome is where the group thing that you measure, individuals no longer are doing what they would have done if they were by themselves. Because other individuals are around them, they're going to change their behavior in some way to match their neighbors, to differentiate themselves from their neighbors, to follow their neighbors. And suddenly what the group does is not what the average of every individual in isolation would have done. Hopefully that was immediately intuitive, but if it wasn't, I'm going to go through some examples right now. All right, let's imagine we're a flock of birds. This is a stolen picture with a watermark on it, which I could not see when I first selected this. My eyes are bad. These are pipers on a beach. Let's imagine that we're on the sunny coast of Santa Barbara, where the temperature is always about 16 to 23 degrees Celsius, and it doesn't change all year round. It only rains 4 days a year, and it's one of the most sought after places to live in North America and indeed the world. Very expensive. But we are pipers, so we just live out on the beach over there, and we have no idea where we live, and we just try to suck down tiny little infaunal invertebrates and not get crushed by waves or eaten by feral cats that have been released by their owners in sunny Santa Barbara. All right, so our lives are somewhat simple as these birds. So we're all wandering around on the beach, running back and forth, avoiding the waves, and running back down to eat these little mussels and clams and things that are or vermiform worms in the soil, and we're running back and forth. But then something dangerous is coming nearby. It's a Santa Barbarian, which is what they're actually called, Santa Barbarian, with one of their thoroughbred dogs that are very expensive. In Toronto, it would be a Shiba Inu, but in Santa Barbara, they want to seem like they're more down to earth. So they have a Vizsla, which they take out for their morning walks, because everyone in Santa Barbara is born retired because their homes they inherited from their parents or their grandparents or whoever, or their sick former and 30 years older former partners that perished. Anyway, so their homes are worth somewhere between $2 million for a crappy sea shanty that barely keeps you safe from the elements to, you know, $30 or $40 million for a nice house next to Oprah. Anyway, so Oprah's out there with her Vizsla. She doesn't actually have a Vizsla, but let's pretend that she's out there with her Vizsla, or, you know, wannabe Oprah, wandering out there with her Vizsla. And that Vizsla, although it says on this beach that although it's dog friendly, dogs must be on a leash, they're not paying attention to this. It's early morning and they feel entitled and they've got their fancy coffee and they're worried about the future. And they're, you know, but their Vizsla's running around. When that Vizsla runs over to us, presumably at some point, we pipers will take off and fly away, right? But when does that happen? When does the average individual in our group take flight? Is it an additive outcome? Each of us in our social group of pipers has a distance at which when we see a predator get to this distance, we're flying away. Some of us are bold. They'll let that Vizsla get real close before they fly off. Some of us are, like me, are neurotic fraidy cats. And so well, as soon as they see a Vizsla as a speck on the horizon, they're like, goodbye, and they fly away, right? So when does the group take off? Is it the additive outcome where each of us takes off at the predetermined distance based on our personalities of when we will, how close we'll let a predator get before we fly off? And so each of us takes off at that independent rate that's determined based on our personalities. Or does the group do something different than the additive outcome of our little personality traits within it? Well, in real life, let me tell you what happens. The most fearful individuals in the group are little like fearful canary in a coal mine scenario individuals will see that little speck Vizsla on the horizon and they're gonna take off. And almost every single individual in that piper group has evolved to attend to what its neighbors are doing. So is the minute that the first few individuals that are fearful fly off, almost every other individual in that group has an inordinately high probability of flying off as well. Yeah, some of those individuals might be bold. And when, under normal circumstances, if they're by themselves on that beach running back and forth, would let that Vizsla get within, 10 feet of them before they flew off. But because everyone else is flying away at the same time, those bold individuals, they fly off too. Because if everybody around you is running like hell, guess what? You should run too. In this case, fly away. So the outcome under most circumstances in animals is the synergistic outcome. They attend to what their neighbors are doing, use their behavior to acquire indirect information about the environment. In this case, it's information that there is danger. You are in danger. You should fly away. And those bold individuals, yeah, they might be able to suck down one extra invertebrate, but getting eaten by a Vizsla, an unruly Vizsla, might just be way more costly. And so they attend to their neighbors, these pipers, and they all fly away simultaneously, more or less, with very little exception. So the group outcome is usually a synergistic property of what the individuals within the group, a synergistic property of the group's behavior, and not the additive outcome of our own independent probabilities of flying away. An additive outcome would be like the first fearful individuals fly away, and then the predator continues to run over towards us, and then others of us decide like, no, this is too much risk for us, and we fly away, and then really and truly that last bold individual will take off, despite that everybody else is taken to the sky, that last bold individual will wait until its own safety threshold is breached, and then it flies away. Obviously, that's not how most animals behave, but it's important to know that that synergistic property of what a group does is what makes collective behavior oftentimes very difficult to infer based on just isolating the individual birds and seeing what they do. It's like thoughts, emotions, almost anything you can imagine being sort of a human behavioral dynamic is a synergistic property of the neurons in your brain, right? If you filleted out the human brain and just look at each individual neuron by itself in the absence of other neurons, you're not going to see, like 1/1000th of an emotion inside of a neuron, 1/1000th of a thought or a mental health issue inside of a singleton neurons. That the product of what a brain does, of what any complex system does, is a property of all these individuals within the group and how they feed back on each other to change each other's behavior. And neurons have behavior, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so I'll leave it there for now since it's been 40 minutes. I'm having a lot of fun in this. We will finish this section off and probably start the lecture on complexity theory, which is directly related to this in the next lecture. I hope you're having fun. Thanks for stopping by. Let's see if I can successfully turn this off for real this time. And indeed, I did. Have a good one, you guys. Have a good one. See you later on Wednesday. Your exam, I think, is next week on Thursday. So start studying. And yes, it's going to, all the content is going to happen all the way up until Wednesday. Wednesday's content, although it'll be a Diet Coke version of that content, is going to appear on Thursday's exam. Please try to get your questions to me by Monday, so I can vet them and try to adjust them and pick some for the exam, and I know whose questions I've used. Anyway, you just fire them to my McMaster email. Take it easy. Have a good one. Bye.